And if you look at it, you grew up in that household. How would you have learned any other system? You watched your
Sure.
dad's behavior. I mean, if we look at it, every animal, like killer whales, how do they learn how to hunt? It's by going with the adults and hunting with them, right?
Sure.
There's so much in our life that is monkey see, monkey do. That's how we learn. It's so much easier to learn. If you're trying to teach me a skill, if you talk about it, it's going to be harder. If you show me, I'm going to get that. Especially there's all sorts of studies with brain waves and things with younger children, how they're just absorbing their environment, right? I mean, kids learn so fast, a lot of times because they don't have a filter for dumb stuff. That's why they do dumb stuff, but they don't have this filter, but so they're just absorbing it. So if you're in that environment and that's what you're absorbing, you're essentially looking at this. Here's the role of a mom. And how else do you know what the role of a mom is? That's the only one you saw close up. And then what's the role of a dad? Well, that's how dads behave.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially your blueprint of here's what you're going to do in your marriage. So that's where you get into it going, it's not your fault necessarily, but I think there's a thing of helping people try to realize, well, where are the holes?
Listen to the vibes.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Listen to the Vibes, and I'm happy to welcome Mr. Aaron Shelley here, who is an author, and I want you to kind of give us the premise of your book, but start off, let's get to know a little bit more about you.
All right, Kyle, thanks. Great to be here. So just kind of about me, my background, I grew up kind of playing sports, doing a lot of physical activities, loved that, kind of got into the reading, ended up studying mechanical engineering in college, kind of decided that if I wanted to be I could be a good engineer, but if I didn't have a good business person behind me, then I wouldn't be successful. So then I got an MBA, and then I've been all over. I've done coding, I've built apps, I worked at ancestry.com at one point in their operations.
Oh, wow.
Then I worked for a company that did Amazon fulfillment, supplement type stuff. And then I just recently worked at a company. We started with about 20 people when I was there and grew it to about 175 in 3 years, took some money, and then I was able to step back. So it's kind of the high level journey. I have 4 kids. My wife and I run an Irish dance school. If you're familiar with river dance, that type of stuff, run it for about 20 years together. So a lot of good stuff. My kids are now getting older, so now I've got more time where they don't require quite as much. So that's kind of the long and short of where I'm at in life right now.
The premise of your book, I understand it's dealing with family structure and business.
Yeah. So what I kind of, at one of those points, I kind of skipped that part. There was a point when I kind of had worked at a startup in genealogy that we spent $11 million in 3 years, weren't able to make it work. And then I was at this point with the Irish dance and we had paid off debt. And so my wife and I were like, well, what do you want to do? And so I had this opportunity to do some research in family and business. There was a guy who was trying to understand the difference between certain groups had higher entrepreneurship level than other groups. And so he was trying to explain that. So then I started doing interviews and doing some research into, I interviewed these people who had been in different structures. Oh, you'd been divorced, you'd gone through these type of things, or, all these different types of relationships and family structures to try to understand how those things would affect the business. So over the course of that, I kind of came up with this concept of this business model and this flywheel. And I kind of wrote up about 50 pages of the idea and had the model. And I gave it to this guy who I was working with. And he said, that's great, but that's your book. So he ended up publishing his book with the research. That was great. And then I was like, well, I didn't really want to publish a book. I was just trying to help you. So over the next 3-4 years, I kind of honed that, got that all written. And then I was also working as an executive at this company, and we were working on how do we create a company culture. When you go from 20 people to 175, you have to look at what are our values in our company? How do we hire in these things? So you start to have a lot of these questions around culture, and you look at structure, because your structure has to change, right? It's no longer like, well, we all kind of report. It's just, there's a little bit of a hive mind here. It's like, no, we have to have a good structure for 180 people so people know how information flows. And then we also were working on our strategy. So those are kind of the key components of what I call the business model of a business, right? So that's kind of where I started to get into these, and I was making these comparisons like, wait, how is a family different than a business? Families are trying to make money. They're trying to survive. Businesses are trying to do that. Like, and I started to make these comparisons, and I know a lot of people view business, oh, it's heartless. And yes, there is a side sometimes where people can act that way. But a lot of times the heartlessness is, if we don't make these changes, we may not survive as a business. So we have to make some adjustments. So I just kind of noticed in this work, business and family, and I kept seeing these parallels over and over. And so then I was like, well, are we implementing the same best practices in families that we do in business? Do we think about it? Because we've spent, I don't know, hundreds of billions of dollars researching business schools, training people. And then we look at family, and it's like such a marginal amount of money is going into it. Best practices, how are parents passing on their best practices to their kids? Do parents even know? So all that type of stuff was kind of what prompted me to get going. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's funny. I worked for a company, and it wasn't a big company, but when I first started there, it seemed as if we were more of a family than just a business.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was happy. Nobody complained. Everybody did their job. Everything ran smoothly, and everything was good up until I had a coworker who was in management. He was stealing money from the company, and it got out. He got fired, and it seems like the tone of the place just changed, and everything kind of went downhill from there. Of course, I wasn't making a whole lot of money there, and I really needed to because I had a family.
Mm-hmm.
But I stuck it out for so long until that moment, and then it was like, it's time to move on, find something else. And I've never really been able to find a company that felt like a family again. And I spent 20 some odd years working for the city, and that definitely was not like a family.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the thing that you see, I would agree, when you're a smaller company, often it's easier to feel like family. A lot of times you're making similar sacrifices, like, well, I'm not getting paid as much, or I'm a little bit junior in this role, but I'm getting this opportunity. You see this in families all the time where you're like, hey, I need someone to help me. My kid's the only one who can help me. The guy's 8, let's go move some furniture. You're like, he's underdeveloped muscle, but you're giving him these opportunities. So there's a lot of that happens in families, just the training as you go based on necessity. And so that's kind of where I think some of those elements, and there's also usually a strong element of trust in a family, right? If you don't trust your spouse, if your kids don't trust you as a parent, has a lot of consequences down the road. So it sounds to me like there's kind of this lack of trust in this business that all of a sudden everyone trusted each other. And then it was like, wait a minute, you just violated it. Now no one trusts anyone. We all think everyone could be cheating. And so now that's kind of broken. So.
Well, just like a family, you have to have a hierarchy, the dad is supposed to be the leader of the family. And he's given that by God, and the wife is there not to only be a helpmate, like the Bible says, but they have to collaborate and get along, and that's the only way it's going to work. And just like in a business, you have somebody underneath that's trying to I don't know, undercut the manager. I don't know what the proper term would be, but once that starts happening, then the whole company gets dysfunctional. And that's exactly what happened at the city.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the interesting things that I've seen in leadership. I think, like to your point, I think there's someone in the family needs to be the leader. There's just some points when you have this. But if you look at leadership, so let's go back to the business world. The CEO, a lot of times people just look at the CEO. They're like, oh, the guy's a dictator. He can do whatever he wants. There's no consequences. But the harsh reality is there's usually investors. And if the CEO is not doing what the investors want, he'll get removed. And then if you look at his executive team, right? I mean, we just saw this at Walt Disney where there was this change of power because the executive team and the board weren't happy with the CEO, right? So you see these things where if you as a CEO, as the leader, are being a dictator to your other executives, your product development, whatever, quite often they can get you removed too. So I don't think I think we've kind of poorly in some cases said the role of the CEO is to be the dictator. It's like, no, their role is to get everyone on the same page, get all the information, look at all the inputs, and then make a decision. But once they make a decision, they can't just be, I made my decision. If someone comes to them and says, well, wait, why did you choose to go here and not over here? They don't have the option to say, well, I just thought I was great. You know, you're gonna piss people off. So you need to, well, here's why I thought this. You over here thought that would be the best thing, but then you didn't understand what sales needed or marketing needed or where our competitors were. So they try to holistically present a vision, a shared vision that everyone wants to be on board with. And I think that's sometimes where we end up with. I've seen that with men in relationships where they're like, well, I'm supposed to be the head of the household and therefore I make all the decisions, and they act like a dictator to a spouse. And then you see this, and then the spouse is like, their wife's like, I'm out. And you're like, turns out you just can't be a dictator. You don't have that right. You need to talk with them and work with them. I know for my wife, she wouldn't have, whenever we go through and we're making decisions together, like when we did this Irish dance business, I had just finished my MBA program. And I had most people when they finish an MBA go to a big company. I had an option to go to Intel up in Portland. But then you're just chasing a job. And I had read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I was like, I want assets. So my wife and I thought about it, talked about it. We talked about pros and cons. And then we kind of collectively decided this is what we want to do with our lives. This is the risk we're taking. So we bought a house with a studio behind it so that she wouldn't have to travel. She could be with the kids. But we were both in this together. If I had been like, hey, we're doing this freaking Irish dance business. She's like, dude, this was not my dream, but now you're making me teach. It would have been a disaster. But as it was, we made the decision together. So I think there's a point in leading where you have to lead, but you can't force people to follow if you're not creating a compelling vision of why what you're trying to do is best for the family, not just for you. Well, I want to stay in power and I want the most money and I want control, but for the family. I've rarely seen problems when that's happening. There's always a little bit of conflict in certain things, but when you come together and leading that and saying, no, we need to make these decisions, that's where I think that you end up with a much better relationship. And you'd see this in business too. If you and I started a business and I'm like, well, I'm the CEO and you're just the chief technology officer, I start acting like a jerk and you're just going to say, here's the bird, leave, I'm out. And then I'm like, well, so then I'm like, well, now I'm the leader of no one. That's kind of where you look at these. Like, I think we've got some bad models and bad ideas of what leadership is. I mean, if you want to talk on the spiritual side, if you look at Christ, people followed him not because he was like, he invited them to come follow. And if they followed, they came. There were people he invited who did not follow, right? He didn't have the vision. So I think that's a lot of where you look at, this servant leadership. Sometimes some people talk about that, but that's a lot of how the role needs to be more like me as the leader. My role is to make it the best for my family. My role is to protect my wife and children from bad decisions, from the negative outside influences, all those things. So that's my job. And I have to do that. But if I'm trying to, well, we can't do anything and we can't spend any money because I'm trying to control it all, it just won't work. So
for sure.
So I mean, I'd kind of think it'd be interesting. So I guess my fundamental thing in the family flywheel that I like to talk about is just a little bit on, if you look at companies like Google, like they have a specific business model. They have a vision, right? And their vision is, we want to organize the world's data. And that's their kind of this key part of their business model, their strategy, as I call it. And then they have a culture. If you're going to try to organize data, you need a lot of creative people. You need a lot of engineers with high stuff. So you give them a lot of freedom to go make decisions. You don't need as much management structure on top of them. So there's some structural issues, I call it. So there's these three pieces: strategy, structure, and culture. And those things in Google, they've aligned well. But if you look at Walmart, that's a different business, right? They're trying to provide families with good quality, help us live better. So they try to get us good quality things at an affordable price. Well, so that's their strategy. Their culture does not have the same freedom and responsibility, freedom and ability to work when you want that Google does. They hire, their structure is we have to have a lot of management hierarchy because we hire a lot of young people or people who need a lot of training. And so you look at these two companies, they're both massively successful, but each one of them has a different business model, which I call the strategy, structure, culture, than the other one. And you couldn't take Walmart's culture and put it in Google. It would be a failure. You couldn't take Google's structure and put it in Walmart. It would be, or their strategy, so that's really the thing you're looking at is the decision-making is really, and that business model that's making those decisions is really the engine that produces the billions and billions of dollars of profit that those people put up. And then if you pull this over to family now, you look at a family and you're like, well, what's your strategy? What's your structure? Like, what is your mission? What do you feel like your purpose? I feel like you've talked about a little bit, like there's some undertones of spirituality. They're probably driving you to do this podcast. And you're like, it's not easy, right? But it's sometimes painful. You were talking about some technical issues, right?
Yes.
But you're like, but it feels fulfilling because it's following your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then if you look at the structure of your family, are you going to live alone? Are you going to be a single parent? Are you going to be a two parent? Are you going to live in a blended family? Are you going to live with an extended family? There's all these different structures that can work. And then you have what culture, what's okay in your culture? Can I swear at everyone? Can I act like a jerk? Do I have to be, do I read a lot of books? What are the values and beliefs? We talked a little bit about this in our exchange, like, do you believe in a positive future? Do you have faith that the world is going to be a better place? I feel like a lot of kids now and a lot of people have kind of lost faith in the future of our world. And now they're like, well, I don't want to have children. Why would I want to bring children into this horrible world? The reality is it's better in every way, pretty much, by most people who judge it. Or why would I start a business if the whole thing's going to fail? So I think a lot of people are or why even get married? Don't 50% of marriages end in divorce? I'm just not going to get married. And so you end up with a lot of people losing faith, losing their trust in humanity, losing their faith that the world will be better. And I don't know. I mean, in some ways you could say we're becoming this faithless generation.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, whenever I became supervisor, and my guys, all the different crews that I watched over, I ultimately was in charge of them. And if something went wrong, I was going to be the one to blame.
Mm-hmm.
Unless of course they did something pretty bad on their own. That's on them. But when I would go out to a job, I'd say, okay, this is what we need to get done. This is what I think you need to do. But I also knew that the guys that were down in the hole working, they could see what's going on better than I could. And if they had a suggestion, they'd let me know. I go, you know what? That might actually work. Let's give it a try. We worked together. And that's how the job got done. So, you had the crew leader and you had me. So that's kind of and then the guys underneath. We would come together, come up with a plan, decide what was best, and we'd give it a shot. About 99% of the time, it worked out pretty good. Same thing at home. As I say, your wife is your helpmate, not your slave.
Yep.
There's a lot of things my wife knows that I don't. I mean, she knows computers, she knows finance. I know how to turn on TV. But seriously, when we have decisions, we talk together. We give each other's opinion and we both decide, you know what, this is what we need to do. And most of the time it works out. And I think that's the way people should approach life in general, you know?
Well, yeah, that's the interesting place is you point out like the different skill sets. This is one of the things I think we're somehow missing now. We have a lot of men and women who are kind of both trying to do the same jobs. And then you're like,
Mhm.
why would we get married? You do the same thing I do.
Mhm.
If I work and I make I make money, and then you work and you make money, why would we get married? Are we just trying to make more money? What are we getting? Well, if we want to have a family, I mean, it's interesting. Like you talk to my wife, she does Irish dance. She took dance, she took music, she did theater, she did all that type of stuff. Growing up, I did marginal amounts of that. Mostly it was around dancing and girls, you know. But most of my other stuff was all in the sciences, engineering, technology, business. So when my wife and I got together, we were very complementary, right?
Mhm.
And if you think about, if you're starting a business, if you and I both wanted to, okay, we're going to start a business and I'm going to be the CEO and you're going to be the CEO. What? Or I'm going to be the marketing person and you'll be the marketing person. You'd say like, why the crap? That's a stupid thing. Go get someone. If you want to do sales, go find someone who does product.
That's
And
right.
that's where we have this idea that if we both do it together, well then, and we both do the same thing, then it'll be better. But I actually think you lose so much of the complementary space. Like my wife likes to interact more, has like the socially, I like it as well, but differently. And so it's like she's reaching out in the community more, those type of things. Whereas I'm more helping in the community when she's like, oh, this person needs some help. Why don't you go do that? And it's connecting me. So that's one of the things that I think in the, you know, that there's this business model where I talk about, that's the thing that's generating resources. And, you know, so you'll take an action. And most of the time people are like, well, all Google does is it just tries to make money. Yes,
Mhm.
sort of, but it'll take its money and then it'll go hire an engineer, right? So it'll increase its human resources. That's what I call human resource, the abilities that they have, but at the cost of money because they think that it's going to do that. Or they'll go to spend $1 million or $10 million on an advertising campaign, right? Well, what's that giving them? That's not giving them money, that's spending money. Well,
Right.
they're building, that's building up what I call their social resources. So there's these three classes of resources: financial, social, and human, that all companies have. But in our families, quite often we ignore, I mean, we ignore those social resources and we ignore the human resources, and we just focus on, well, I bring in the money. Who cares? I take care of the family. I take care of the house. I like take care of you, make food, do all these things. That's keeping you healthy. If you're not healthy, you're going to be a sucky. You're going to not be able to make money. So there's this very strong specialization you see in successful companies, right? You want people with all sorts of different skills. And then if there's some skill you don't have, well, someone's got to do it, especially if you're a young company. I don't like accounting. You don't like accounting. But turns out government's going to come after us. So we either
Mhm.
need to outsource it. Someone needs to be over that. Who's going to take care of it? So that's the place where it's this always negotiation in a company, especially a small one, how you're going to make things work. And you want complementary skill sets. And in a family, it's the same. There's a negotiation between, well, if we never go on vacation with our children, we will have more money potentially, but we will have lost all the connectivity in the family. We will have lost opportunities, right? Just like in a company, you'll have usually your human resource department, like, what do we do for activities? What do we do to build our culture? What do we do for those type of things? And they have a voice at the table. Now you can't say, we're going to spend more money on that than we're going to spend on marketing and sales usually. But they're like, how do we keep people happy in the family? How do we keep them healthy? All those two, that there's a reason that department exists, and it's useful to have it at the table. I mean, you'll have your executives and you'll have an executive of people operations, or people sometimes, and you'll have your marketing and your sales and your product all at the same table saying, here's all the different trade-offs we're trying to make. What's best for the business? And that's where I think with our families, I see the social resources in a company as being our marketing and sales departments, right? And PR, that type of stuff, the reputation, your brand. In our families, though, when both people are trying to work, two income earners, well, you're kind of saying, well, we don't need marketing and sales in our family. Like, we don't need these social connections. And then you wonder why our society feels like it's more disconnected than it has been. Well, because no one's investing in these social relationships.
Yeah, sure.
So that's kind of the way I look at this. Like, you want with your spouse to have this complementary. If I don't, am I going to invest for financial returns like my dad did? He went and worked white collar job as a professor. That's what he did. And then my mom would go serve in the community, serve in church groups, serve at Eagle Scout, serve in Scouts. And it was interesting, when I got married, there were about 400 people who came, and I was just like, I don't even know this person. I was shaking their hand. Oh yeah, we're this. Why are you here? This is my wedding. Right? This is me. My wife doesn't know you. I don't know you. This is ours. Oh, well, your mom, she helped my son get his Eagle Scout. Oh, your mom, she served in this position and helped us through this difficult time when my son, had this, or when my daughter had these problems, or when we had a health crisis, or when some mental health. I was like, oh, you're not here for me. You're here for my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the type of, my mom had built up such strong social connections in our community, those social resources. And whenever she needed stuff, or when I'm like, hey, I'm looking for a job, this book thing came through her. She was like, hey, this guy, he's writing a book. He could use your help. And I'm like, all right. It's just like, there's the connector in the family. But if there's no connector in the family, it's like telling a company they shouldn't have a marketing and sales department. It's going to be it's not going to work well. So that's why I think there's this complementary thing we're looking for in a business. And we need to look at it holistically, not just like, well, we're both doctors and we both spend so much time at work and we make millions of dollars. Yeah, but you don't like each other. You don't see each other. You've made no memories. Your kids hate you. You're divorced. Is that really wealthy? That's kind of where I look at it. Like, unless you have all three of those resources, you're not really wealthy in my mind. I'm a billionaire, but I'm sick with cancer because I smoked and didn't pay attention to my health. Okay, right. I don't want to trade places with you, money for my health. Or you're a billionaire, but your kids hate you and you have no relationship with your wife, and there's all these things. That's also not wealth, right? So you look in a company, and a company would never be like, hey, we're wealthy, we have all this money, but we have no employees. Okay, well, that's not your engine is gonna putter out, right? So it's this balance. You look at Google, you're like, you have hundreds of thousands of employees. Those are tons of human resources that are doing that. Then you have this great brand that you've built. You have people who are marketing, and then you have you have property, you have technology, all those different, those three classes of resources. That's what a successful company has. And a successful family is the same. And if we only focus on, my take is, if you only focus on one resource, like I think the US is, a lot of the different movements have kind of pushed people to say, like, your only value specific, a lot of it's for women, like your main value is if you make money. And so then you have these women who go and become lawyers, and they're like, I'm miserable. Like, this isn't fun. I don't have a social life. I have to be on in the weekends. This isn't the life I wanted. I have no children. I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. And I'm not saying that's why I look at this business model concept. Like, I'm not saying women can't do those things, or men can't do these, men can't stay home. I'm not saying there's any specific gender roles. Like, in my relationship, I'm the tech guy. Sounds like in your relationship, your wife's the tech person. That's fine, right? It's not about right or wrong. Just like in a business, it's about having a business model without friction, where you're both saying, I'm happy with this spot. And you're like, yeah, I'm happy here too. Great. That's a good partnership.
That's right.
So even in the past, you look at like a farmer would be like, I need a farmer's wife. Like, I need someone to take the butter. I need someone to build a garden. I need someone to do these other things. My grandpa was a farmer, and my grandma was she took care of the chickens. She killed them. She did all these things. So you look at this, like, you needed this complementary skill set because you were kind of running what some people have called a two-person career. And now, you fast forward from the 1930s, and now it's kind of become like, well, we can now make money. We can now do stuff. And we're not looking at the career side together. So then you kind of look in your relationship like, what am I getting out of this? What am I bringing? and what am I receiving? And so there's this weird thing. But if you have the complementary skill sets, you're often pretty like, this is great. I appreciate what they bring.
It's so strange. And I will say I am glad that I am older and married, because the dating scene nowadays is I just don't want to have anything to do with it. My wife ends up leaving me, I'm just going to stay single. But I see these videos over and over again where the guys are like, you know what? I don't know what woman to ask out because I don't know how she's going to react. She's going to call me a creep or whatever because I asked her on a date. And then you've got these women who have, they've followed all the rest of the feminists and I'm strong, independent, but then they're crying and they're desperate because they're lonely. Like, yeah, I'm an independent person. I can take care of myself, but I all I have is my pillow to hug at night. It breaks your heart, honestly, to see some of these women and how they've reacted, and they're counted as weak because they want to be with someone.
Mm-hmm. And they want a family, right? They want children. There was a woman who I saw that she had said, I did that. I was a CEO. I didn't have children. I'm now 50. And I'm just lonely when I go home.
Mm-hmm.
And I've passed the point where I can have children. So I can't, you can't undo certain decisions.
That's right.
And that's where I look at this. There's two sides. I think the guys are saying, if the woman is saying, I'm strong and independent, I can make my money, I have my vacations, I have all these, as I look at it, a lot of people are getting married later. So they've kind of already built up their own business with just a solo founder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's doing okay. We're making enough money, we're doing fine. And so if you now have a woman and a man who are both kind of building their solo companies, like I had one guy who he was in his 40s and he's like, I have $1 million, I could retire today, but I'm not married, have no kids. But now, if you look at it, when I got married, I was 21. I had nothing. My wife had nothing. It's like, let's come together and make something. Much more like a startup. But if you're waiting until you're later in life, all of a sudden it's more complicated because it's not a startup. You're like, well, I have this business, and like my buddy, I have $1 million. And then this woman, she doesn't have $1 million. How do I make this equal? How do I make this work? I'm concerned that she's just going to spend my money. There's
Exactly.
there's all these things because they don't have a common business model. So it's interesting. I see it like what's happening is now they're trying to merge companies in the business sense, right? It's not that they didn't have all those. They had structure, they had culture, they had strategy. Now they're trying to figure out which ones of these do we get rid of? Which ones merge? Is there a good synergy? And as anyone who does business knows, mergers are always rough because you have business that's going different ways. You have values that are potentially changing. You have leadership that's changing. There's so many different changes. A good chunk of the mergers, I think it's over 50%, don't actually add any value to the companies that merge. So that's where I see that we're kind of in this weird space. But then there's a secondary part where I was talking to this woman, I have a story in the book about it, where she's like, I'm strong and independent. And then I'm like, you're divorced, you have 2 kids, and you live with your parents. How are you independent? Like, your parents are helping you with your children. Your parents, you make money, sure, but you couldn't function without them. You're actually in an extended family structure, as I call it. You're not this, oh, I'm so independent. And that's where I think people aren't really making that. Well, are you really independent, or are you really dependent upon all these people around you and you just don't realize it?
Right.
Well, and then secondarily, I think for a guy, if a guy goes to a girl and she's like, I'm strong, independent, have my own money, have my own this, I think for some men, they look at it like, it's like we're on a date. It's like you're interviewing me for a job, but I don't understand what the job is. Do you even need a job done? It sounds like your company's going great, right? So there's this weird thing. Like, imagine going to a job interview and they're like, well, we don't really need you. Well, why am I here? Why are we talking? Is this a waste of time? But the reality is they're like, well, I do want this relation. I do want these things, but I want to present this face like I'm all independent. And I think it's this weird side where if you started from a business perspective, like, what is your vision for the woman and the man. Why are you wanting to get married? Why are you even wanting to date? Do you want to have children? What is this long-term thing? Because I've seen a lot of guys nowadays, they're very, I mean, I have a close friend, and I was talking with him. He's like, well, I don't want to tell my wife what to do. I don't want to. And I was like, you're not telling her, you're trying to create a vision that they can get on board with. Right? Like if you come in, you're like, here's what I want to do with my life. If you were dating, I want to have a family. Here's my priorities. I'm going to do this. Here's how my family's going to look. I'm going to work my butt off to make this happen. And I think a lot of women, if a guy were to do that, they'd be like, cool, I like that. Or someone who says like, I don't want that. Then you'll be able to make that distinction. But right now, I think guys are trying to be like, you want to work? I'll stay at home. And you want to, well, sadly, men don't have the ability to have children. So women are going to have to do at least that part of the specialization.
You can't say that.
Yeah. So that's the problem. There's like this element of how are we going to specialize this? And I've noticed, I mean, if you actually go through, there's a couple of books that are quite interesting. One called The Female Brain, one called The Male Brain. And it talks about just the differences between men and women and how our hormones are driving us and different things, like all these different factors actually as our brains change as we have children as men, right? And then as we get married, our brains change for men. And then as we have children, our brains change. Same with women. When women get married and then they have children, their brains are actually changing to the situation. So it's this place of if you're kind of, if you were my children, I don't know how yours have been. My one daughter was like, oh, I never want to date a boy. Okay, she's young. She doesn't know anything. Then she goes through puberty. Then she's like, well, yeah, I don't want to date, but I never want to get married. Give it some time now. She's married. It's like our brains and our bodies are changing. And to assume that we're smart enough now, like, I don't think any of us chose like, hey, I want to go through puberty now. Like, now it's my time,
Right.
Our bodies are just going through those things. And I think a lot of people are making assumptions that our decisions now are going to be good later when our brains and certain things haven't even developed and our body hasn't changed. So there's this place where I've seen, I mean, I saw there's one woman I know, my relative was dating her and she was like, I don't want kids. And she's 24 and she chose to go sterilize herself.
Oh,
and I was like, well, I guess, but do you understand, like, you are the line. Every single woman before you wanted to have children, otherwise you wouldn't exist. So to believe that you are intellectually somehow different and biologically different is just bizarre. So that's the kind of stuff where you see, like, I see with a lot of the dating, most of the young people don't have a vision on where they're wanting to go. A lot of them have left religious organizations, so they have no vision for the family. They're like, so it really comes down to like two people. Hey, I don't know, you're hot. Imagine if we hired people at companies. Okay, all you get to see is their picture and their interest. Why do I care? Those aren't even the relevant pieces. Like, what do they want in their life? What is their what is their long-term goals? What skill sets are they bringing to the table? How are those complementary? Those things are much more important than hot, like,
yeah,
scrolling on a dating app.
Unfortunately, this is the hookup generation. They want to have their fun and then move on to the next one. There's no real want for family. I'm talking majority, not all.
Well, there was a book called Datanomics that I read where it talked about what happens when you have too many men in a particular society or too many women. It talks about the gender demographics. Have you heard of that at all?
I have not.
Okay, so this is fascinating because what he did in this book is he said, if there's a lot of men competing for women, how do men compete? And he's like, well, men usually compete with productivity. They go make more money. They go get their status, right? That's why you're on the football team. That's why you're doing these things. You're competing for status. That's why we have fancy cars, all these things, competing with status and money. And there's a lot of data where it talks about, if you make $30,000, women are going to be like, not that attractive. You make $200,000 a year, women are going to be like much more attractive. And so that's how men compete, is with those being productive. Then you look on the other side and say, well, what happens? How do women compete? Because men aren't like, ooh, man, look at her. She was making 30. Now she's making 200. Like, they don't compete the same way. Women usually compete with looks, or in some cases, sex, right? Where they give out sex more freely. So what they found is, if you have a higher number of, like, if you go to a college now, there's some colleges that are 60% female, 40% male, right? Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I have heard that stat.
So you look at that in college, most people kind of want to date around and, partner off if possible. Whether they want to get married at that point, who knows? But if you have 60% female and only 40% male, that means that 20% of the women, there is legitimately no man there for, right? 1/3. Well, so what happens is the women then have to be more aggressive with their makeup, with their clothing, tighter clothing, more exposure, skin, and then more aggressive with sex. Like, let's have sex on the first date. Let's try to hook this guy, right? And the guys, because of that, then the guys become, I think someone called them lamer, like they don't work as hard. Hey, if the women are easy, I don't need to work as hard. Why be productive? So you kind of have the women who are working harder to compete in their metric, but then the men are less competitive because they're like, well, there's all these women who want to get with me, therefore I can just churn through them. So you have this weird experience where women are like, well, I feel like I was used. I feel like I was looking for this relationship. And the guys are like, but why would I do that when there's, 20% of the women or a third of the women that you're competing with? But so that's kind of what happens when you end up with too many females as relates to males. Then if you get too many men, so you go to an area, the biggest example is China, where there's, I think it's like in the dating markets, 5 million more men than women. So I have friends over there, and they're like, if you're in Beijing and you don't have a nice job, an apartment, a car, and you're not saving 20-30% of your income, you're not even dating material, right? So you look at this, like, so the men are hyper driven to be productive. And he actually said this is one of the reasons why China has been so productive, was because of this excess of men. And he also talks about other areas like Silicon Valley has a lot more men than women. So you see high levels of productivity out of it. I would be surprised, frankly, with Austin, because of the tech scene, if it's not becoming a little more masculine in terms of that. Therefore, if you're in a place where there's more women than men, then the women can be more choosy, right? The women can be like, oh, you're doing a startup. That's cool. How's it going? Not so good. Okay, well, I'm not going to hook up with you. So then the guy goes and works on a startup some more. I haven't got enough. So essentially what happens, and what we're seeing is a little bit, and up until 1940, I looked in the census data, there was always more men than women in the United States, right? So you could always, up until 1940, you could pretty much say to any woman, find a good guy, get married, settle down. Right. And the men would be competing for those women to be productive. After 1940, and then you take into account incarceration rates and other demographic factors, now there's this shortage of guys, and especially a shortage of good quality guys. Yeah. So now what we're seeing is the men, there's so few good men that the women are fighting over them. And so the dating scene has become more of a hookup scene just because of the nature of the demographics. Which is, it's sad because I don't really see an easy way out. That's the thing. There's not like let's just go import a whole bunch of high quality men from some other country, or for the China problem. Hey, let's go find some other country. Let's go find, 5 or 10 million extra women to pull into China. Like, these are not simple problems to deal with.
What's sad is I saw a report where men are now more attracted to foreign women than the women here in the United States. And one reason is because of this feminist movement. Now, don't get me wrong. I think a woman should be strong. I think a woman should be prepared to take care of herself if there's not a man around. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But there's got to be some give and take here.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to have, it's the weird value trade-offs that are being made, right? I agree. I have 3 daughters. I wanted them to get my one daughter's a nurse already, so she has a good career. She wants to do potentially a CRNA. She's married. And so it's this whole, do you want them to be able to not be totally dependent, but then you also want them to have the option to, if the circumstances are right, become a mother, spend time there, have a family, right? And this is, in the book, I talk about the Bill Gates's mother, Mary Gates, because so she was a school teacher. She married the dad. I remember his name. I think it's William Gates, and he was a lawyer. Well, she taught school. She had 3 kids, and then she taught for a little bit, and then she dropped out of teaching and just focused on her family because she had 3 young kids. Then it seems like, based on the stuff you can see online, she did that for a while, and then she kind of got back into community service. She didn't go to work because she needed the flexibility with her family, but then she got into community service. So she served on the board of the University of Washington, I think, and then she also served on the board of United Way. Well, turns out the CEO of IBM also worked at the board of United Way, and that was one of a good connection that Bill Gates and the CEO made through the mother, right? So you look at this like, she made those decisions for her family. She spent time training him. They also sent him to a great school. But then her connections actually, I mean, I can't, you can't say, there's no way to know, but it could have been, a relationship worth 50 billion or $100 billion, right? So those are the places where I see women, you want that flexibility especially for women, because you're like, well, I can't have children. I can't nurse children, especially if you want to have, I had 4 children. So it's like a lot of time for my wife to be out of the workforce. I mean, she actually just taught Irish dance all the time, but she had to make some trade-offs. But that's where I think women, you want to have them with the option. But because if they don't have the option and they're like, no, I have to work because I married this guy who makes no money, I don't know, that's great. Right, unless she has kids, or unless there's some other things that are working out. So you want this options, but really pushing towards, no, women, you should focus on your career. I mean, you're kind of seeing as, Elon Musk talks about population collapse. It's like, men can work as hard as they want, but at the end of the day, they can't create any children unless we get to cloning or something, right? But that's where you look at it like, we can't do that. And if it's not done, our society literally will collapse. Right. You see it in Japan, the population of Japan is going to be 50% what it is by 2100. Right. You look at China's having similar stuff. These things, it's like, if you do not have children, your society will fail. And that's where we're running into, where we're now valuing money over society, over the long-term health of our society. What are we like? It's kind of like in a business, if you're like, well, we have a good brand, but we're just going to screw over our customers, get as much money as we can, but we're not going to have any ability to make money in the future.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you're compromising your future for the present. It's not a good thing. So,
didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's fine.
My grandparents on my mom's side, grandpa, very hardworking man, made good money. My grandma, she was a heck of a housekeeper. I mean, she could cook, she could sew, she kept her place clean, and she was happy to do so. She never once complained. You never saw a frown on her face when she did it. In fact, she would light up because you came in and you ate her food and you complimented on all those things. You took a lot of pride in that. And now you say things like that, and a lot of the women will say, well, she was just a slave, and blah blah blah, all the talking points that you hear nowadays. Some people like those roles. I actually saw a TikTok video. There was a girl who was going to college, and she started griping, thanks a lot, feminist, now I gotta finish out college and I got to get a job and I got to do this. And back in the 50s, Well, all you had to do was clean the house and cook a meal and do the laundry, and you took care of the household, and your husband took care of everything. But now I have to work. Some
Yeah.
women like that role, and I really wanted that. I really did. But unfortunately, I got married too young. I was 19 when I got married. I took whatever job I could get to take care of us. And
Mhm.
let's face it, I didn't have the education or the skills to get a good paying job. And it took me a long time to build up to where I'd gotten to. And even then, it wasn't that much money. So we both had to work.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, in my first marriage, we just had different ideas and grew apart. And she took off with another guy, went her way, and I was left to fend for myself. And I ended up getting custody of the boys, and I took care of them, single dad. But I always wanted what my grandparents had. I mean, they were together. Let's see, my grandpa just passed away a few years ago. He was in his late 90s. Grandma just passed away about a year or so ago. She was in her mid 90s, and
Mhm.
they'd been together since they were very, very young. So you're talking, but at least 70 years they were together. 70 years. You don't see that very often anymore. And it took me a long time to find the wife that I have now. And I said, if I'm going to do this again, it has to be the same, at least the same love that my grandparents had for each other, the same respect they had for each other. And yes, my wife and I were both working. I won't get into details, but I'm disabled, and I have to unfortunately rely on disability, and I do get my retirement. But I'm doing this for many reasons. One, of course, to help others, but let's face it, I want to be able to monetize, make my own money, and so I'm not living off the government. That's just who I am.
Mhm.
But we're
Well,
we
yeah,
still we're working together.
yeah, and that's the place where it's like that's where you get down into your value system, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like you have a value that you want to contribute to society, right? That's how I feel. It's actually one of my family values is around contribution, right? And that's what I think has been some of the ideology that's been pushed has been away from, hey, I want to contribute in ways that aren't obviously monetized, like not they don't give me money back, right? Your grandma you're talking about, she was feeding the family, she was making the food, she was doing these things, she was probably doing the laundry, she was keeping the household running, right?
Yep.
In a company we'd call that operations, right? There's the salespeople who are doing all the sexy stuff and hey we did this, there's the developers who are hey you're doing this, and then there's just the operations, the day-to-day of getting everything done, making it all happen. And it's kind of like we're pushing to these weird extremes of, hey, unless you're one of the sexy roles, then you're not anything. And you're like, but your grandma was literally keeping the family alive.
That's right.
You know, I'm sure when people got sick, she's the one who's taking care of them.
Very
And
much
then,
so.
and another place that I've thought that's interesting, you know, when I remember when I came home from school, and because I had my mom was there, you know, here's how the day went. I got kicked in the face, or this happened, or I failed a test, all that stuff. Then I'd come home and I'd talk about it with my mom, and she would discuss it and make sense of it, help me make sense of it. And okay, maybe you stay away from that kid, or maybe you need to stand up to that kid, and maybe you need to study harder for the test, or maybe like they help you understand and make sense of the world. I think it's, in some ways it was like every day I had a therapist to help do that. And now when
Mm-hmm.
we see it, we've lost the person who's taking care of the health, physical health. Now we've lost, and then the mental health of the family. And then you go, well, what would happen if you don't have these roles and you just send them to school where it's 30 or 40 kids for every teacher? It's chaos, there's fights, there's disagreements, there's questions. What's going to happen? Of course, it's going to be horrible. the kids aren't being socialized by parents or adults. They're being socialized by other kids. So it's
right.
all these things. And I'm not saying, I do think a lot of like washing machines and Walmart and all these stores have helped with a lot of the food making that the women had to do and making it easier to wash the clothes. So there's a lot of time I think that women have extra, but I think we've lost the other, like, oh, you're also the nurse and you're the therapist and you're the cook and you're not the slave. You're an important part of this company. And I think there were some men who were like, well, I make the money, the dictator again, therefore I'm the most important. It's just like the a-hole sales guys who are like, I'm the most important, I bring in all the money. Yeah, but if we don't support it, it disappears. So this can't be one's better. We're all essential. It's just like, with your body. Well, I don't need this hand because I have another one. Let's chop it off. Well, I don't need it's just silly. So to me, it's this whole looking at your family holistically and going, we gave up so much. And I only think now, with the mental health crisis, with those things that are happening, with so many people on medications for all, ADHD and depression and blah, you go through it. Well, that's a function of we lost this role in our families. We didn't realize what we were giving up. And there's a lot of cases, I think, like when people move, I think often people are, I'm gonna make $10,000 more if I move to this new city. Yeah, but you're losing all of your social resources that you've built up.
Yeah.
And if they're bad, if you're involved in a gang and all this bad stuff and you're like, I want to get away. Great, you want to sever those. But so often it's like, oh, I'm going to make more money. I'm moving here. I'm moving. I know, just move around. And then you'll often find, especially for women, they need friends. They need companionship. They need these things.
Yes,
and they actually have. So then you'll see like the women will, we just moved from, California to New York. And the women are like, I don't like it here. I want to go back with my parents. My kids are crazy. I don't feel like I have support. And then all of a sudden, often you'll have families that are breaking up or having serious issues because of that. The kids had to make new friends in school. There's a lot of stress that you're putting on the family when you cut off those relationships. And we just don't have a way to quantify them really. Like, well, that's cool. You got a $10,000 raise and you gave up $100,000 of social connections. You're an idiot, right? We don't have a way to make the comparison. And so we undervalue the thing we can't really measure well. So
the thing with my wife and I, we both agreed to move up here to Austin. I'd be quite honest with you. I did have some very good friends that were very positive in my life, but I also had a lot of them that were a bad influence in my life. They were the ones that still like to party and I still think of them as brothers, but I love them from afar. And being up here is really a better environment for me because I don't have the temptations that I had when I was there. And we both agreed to do this. Now, we're fortunate enough that our kids are grown up. So, I mean, my oldest is 30, my youngest is 25. So,
must be nice.
Hey, you know what? I could probably send one to you if you want. So. And now we have the benefits of having grandkids. And that's the best. I love being a grandpa. The things that we went through, the sacrifices, the struggles, I can honestly look back and say I would not trade that if I had to give up my kids. They have kept me sane. They have made me want to be a better person. And they've given me these beautiful grandkids, 3 wonderful little boys, and you can have all the money and security that you want, but if you don't have someone to share it with, if you don't produce like the family that I have, it's just not worth it, honestly. And
that's the thing where I look at the flywheel. I don't know if you're familiar with what a flywheel is. Have you ever that concept at all?
I have heard the concept, yes.
So yeah, so for people who don't know, it's this idea of like you get this flywheel going and then it maintains momentum and then you can spin it up and keep spinning it up faster. Sometimes you have to take energy out of it, but it kind of spins. And you see this in business where Walmart, it took them 20 years to build their first 1,000 stores. And then in 1 year, they were able to build 1,200 stores, right? Because they had this flywheel. Now we have the resources and we have the people and we have the processes. And that's the thing that I look at with families. It's the same concept. Like you've learned a lot of lessons, right? Now the
Yes.
question is, how do you pass on those lessons to your children so that instead of them starting from a blank slate of, okay, I got a kid, now how do I raise it? Do I spank it? Do I not spank it? Do I use different, what punishments are effective, or how do I train it? You're looking at this, like, how do you pass on that wisdom that you've learned? It doesn't sound like everything in your life was sunshine and roses.
No.
It never is in business either. You start a business, it's never like, oh, it just went perfectly and we made them. It's like, no, it's constantly dealing with fires. But at the end, you're like, now you have these children, now you have these families, you've learned the wisdom. Now, how do you make sure that gets passed on so that they can, instead of your children starting from scratch, they at least have a blueprint of, here's what I found. You don't have to, you don't want to force on like, here's how you have to do it, but you could go through and be like, okay, here's what I found in raising you. In raising boys, I found you guys are a little raucous and you like to break everything. So don't really spend a lot of time on expensive furniture and money. I mean,
Yeah.
when my son wrote his name in Sharpie on our couch, I was
Oh
like,
Lord.
I'm glad I didn't pay. These are not super expensive because they got destroyed. I mean, my daughter destroyed our coffee table in a glass panel and she jumped on it. You're like, well, I should have got a little more durable things. So you can that's kind of the thing that I look at. Like, if you can get this going, everyone starts from somewhere, but you can get the flywheel going and then you're really pushing off wealth to your children, right? Because if they can learn those lessons that you've learned and then start to build on them, and then it might take a few generations, but over time, then you have this massive success of learning and of collaborating versus, oh, well, we're dysfunctional and then they're dysfunctional and then they're dysfunctional. So it's kind of like, how do you get together and build off of it? In company, if you were on the sales team in a company and we started, okay, figure out how to sell. That's version 1. And then, okay, we figured out some new things. Version 2, we might be on version 5. And the new sales guy, we're going to pull in, we hire him. And then we say, here, we're going to train you on version 5, right? We're not going to give you version 1 and have you go through the process. We're going to give you the best and greatest. But we don't really do that with our family much because we're like, I don't know. What did I learn? Have I thought about what I learned? What were my frustrations? How did I negotiate with my wife? Like, even just being married is a skill set, right? Like,
Yeah.
And you see, this is one of the areas I get concerned with. If people grow up in a single parent household, which is not their fault, but they're missing a set of skills of seeing two people negotiate, work together, that whole piece. Sometimes you get frustrated, sometimes you get different things, but they see those two people can have conflict and have disagreements and still love each other and still work together. Whereas if you don't grow up with that, you're like, I don't even know how to work with another person. Right. So that's the conflict that I see in some places, like, or the issue is just they don't know how to deal with how it should work. They don't really have a blueprint for it. And then you go, well, it's going to be much more difficult for you to stay married and be married just because you don't know what it actually entails.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the house that I grew up in, it was very dysfunctional. And I told you before the show started, I just don't feel like my parents really loved each other. They were just kind of there. I never saw them being loving and, doing things together. My dad was always gone working. Sometimes I wouldn't even see him. He'd come home late and, went straight to bed, and I was already in bed. And I kind of feel like maybe that was part of the way my first marriage was. We just weren't ready, and I wasn't mature because look, I just partied. And now I understand, and now I want everything to be like what my grandparents had.
And if you look at it, you grew up in that household. How would you have learned any other system? You watched your
Sure.
dad's behavior. I mean, if we look at it, every animal, like killer whales, how did they learn how to hunt? It's by going with the adults and hunting with them, right?
True.
There's so much in our life that is monkey see, monkey do. That's how we learn. It's so much easier to learn. If you're trying to teach me a skill, if you talk about it, it's going to be harder. If you show me, I'm going to get that. Especially there's all sorts of studies with brain waves and things with younger children, how they're just absorbing their environment, right? I mean, kids learn so fast, a lot of times because they don't have a filter for dumb stuff. That's why they do dumb stuff, but they don't have this filter, but so they're just absorbing it. So if you're in that environment and that's what you're absorbing, you're essentially looking at this. Here's the role of a mom. And how else do you know what the role of a mom is? That's the only one you saw close up. And then what's the role of a dad? Well, that's how dads behave.
Mhm.
That's essentially your blueprint of here's what you're going to do in your marriage. So that's where you get into it going, it's not your fault necessarily, but I think there's a thing of helping people try to realize, well, where are the holes in my education? And that's kind of like I talk about it at a business model. You've said like your parents ended up getting divorced, right?
Well, actually, I take that back. They didn't get divorced, but they did separate and they never got back together again.
Yeah. So in the sense of separation, if you looked at it, if you and I started a business and then we were like, hey, we're no longer working together, we would call that a failed business,
Mhm.
right? And if I came to you and I said, hey, here's how you got to run your business, just run it like that. Well, you failed. Why would I, So that's where I think you don't want to, sometimes people get upset a little bit about the label of failure, but you learn from failure. Like you've talked about that in your own life. And so if you're looking at these other people going, well, my mom and dad, they did not have a happy relationship and that's not what I want. How do I figure out where can I go to find out what a happy relationship would look like or one that I want? And how do I find someone who also wants that same thing? Because I know my wife and I have had a lot of, I don't know, not physically, but verbally aggressive disagreements and fights and those type of things. But we're both in it. We're both okay. That's our culture. And we both want what's best for the company, what's
Mhm.
best for the family. So that to me is like, but if my wife had been like, well, if we fight, then it means that we don't love each other. If that was her belief, hey, loving couples never fight, never have disagreements, therefore we need to get divorced or we need to separate, then it would have been a disaster, right? So that's kind of where you look at how are we training, how are we being trained by our families? But then it sounds to me like you've broken a piece of that. You're more successful, you have your wife now, you're like, okay, now I'm getting into, I now know how to do this marriage thing. But now how do you how do you push this onto your, because how many kids? You said you had 3 kids?
I have 3 kids. Yep.
How many are married?
Uh, just my daughter.
Just the one. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you look at that, like, how do you pass it on to her and her husband, what you've learned? Because I think we don't want to talk. Sometimes we're like, well, I made some mistakes and I don't want to pay for them. I wish I could go back and have the wealth that I would have had and all the happiness and success. Well, we learned them, but if we pass that on to our kids and then they get the benefits of it, that's where you get this flywheel started. So even
Mhm.
though you could say like, yeah, your first marriage had issues. Okay, you've now onto your second, you figured out a better model. Now, how do you pass on what you've learned so that your family over the next few generations can become super successful? It might be one generation, it could be two. I mean, if you look at my family history, it was like, it's kind of, hey, we were lifestyle, we were keeping alive, farmers, ranchers, that type of stuff. And only recently has it been a little more success, but it's generational success because there's so many things we need to learn. But I also feel like now with this hookup culture, like you're saying, and less marriage, we're breaking a lot of the learning. We're breaking a lot of the wisdom that we used to have.
Yeah, and unfortunately, society seems to be against the traditional family now, and it's all about the single mom and don't need no husband and all that kind of garbage. And I'm sorry, I mean, you have your your successes outside of that, but for the most part, kids fail because you have one person that's taking the role, both roles, and they can't be there for the kids. And
Well,
that,
and it's the thing that I heard, there was a book called The Boy Crisis by Warren Farrell and John Gray, the guy who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And they actually said in there, there's some studies that have been done, and they say boys that are raised without a dad have 15-point lower IQ scores, which is massively impactful. 100, if you had an IQ of 100 and then it went down to 85, the military won't take you if you're at that level, right? And they want to take as many people as possible. So it's like not having a dad in the home has massive developmental impacts for the boys. And I think for a lot of people, even myself included, I was like, well, if a family gets divorced and they go with the mom, they should go with the mom. She's the best nurturing, but they're saying, look at the impact. If they're in that environment, they're not going to have the same challenge. So it's interesting. I'd be interested in your experience, because you said you got divorced and then you got the boys.
Yeah, well, they're both successful. My youngest is a nurse, and the oldest son, he's an esthetician, so he does all that stuff with people's skin. And but my daughter, she's successful too. She actually ended up living with my mother, and my mother lived with my grandparents, so they all, all big family over there. And she's now a manager at a bank, so
yeah,
they're successful despite their father, or in spite of.
I think you lack the credit. I mean, it sounds to me like you kind of, once you got the kids, you've got refocused. You see this a lot with guys. I've seen this there's a difference. It seems like with men, they need weight on their shoulders. The number of men that I've seen blossom I had a good friend of mine, he got married. He was totally played around, skied, did every activity, went to college, failed out because he was so doing all these activities. He got married, got this girl pregnant, and then he went from just playing around to waking up at 4 a.m. to do a paper route, then doing an electrician. Then he was working on being a contractor. The guy's now worth, I don't know, $5 or $10 million. Wow. Right. And he lives in this, he has a massive house, which he's trying to turn. So you look at these things and you're going, that type of weight on men's shoulders actually helps them. It's amazing to me, like you go to the gym and you're watching people take on responsibilities, men, especially, more weight they get, the stronger they get, our bodies just morph. And I think it's the same where as soon as men take on this or choose to take on responsibility, all of a sudden our brains just go into, all right, whatever the F I need to do to make this happen, I will do. Right. Yeah. And I don't know what your experience was, but I've been so impressed with so many guys who have been in those situations where they just decided for whatever reason to take responsibility. And then you're just like, holy cow, look how successful you were. It's just this chain of power almost. I don't know how to describe it.
Well, now that you mention it, when I was when I first got the boys, I was a crew leader, but in no time I ended up being a supervisor. So I don't know, maybe that was the motivating factor there. And they turned out to be all right. I guess I'll keep them.
Well, and that's a lot of what I think the boys see that, they'll see their dad working hard. They see their dad doing whatever it takes to make the family work, to do for them. And I think that's a good lesson, because ultimately, I just have looked at like, you've said this too. What is more important than your children?
Can't imagine anything being more important.
Would you, if I paid you $1 million, can I kill one of them? 10 million, like, or can they disappear? No. You're like, no. So that's what's such a fascinating thing is we value them so heavily once we have them. And yet before we have them, a lot of people now, I don't want kids. I don't want that. You don't want the most valuable thing that all of these rich people have, you're looking at all these people and they say what's most important. And then you're not looking at that value system and saying, hey, maybe that's a better business model. Maybe those values and beliefs are going to make me more successful. And that's, I think, actually a weird contradiction that I think exists if done right in a family business model. If you have a couple and they both could work, but then they start to specialize. I've seen multiple examples where if they specialized, or if they were to specialize, the family would actually have more money, right? And have better relationships and have better human resources. It's just like, I think if we neglect a lot of these, like the social connections, it actually makes your company worse. Do you know what I mean? It's this weird thing where if you neglect it as a family, you're actually going to be poor monetarily. And then you're going to be poor relationship, and then you're going to be poor in terms of your abilities, your time, and your health, your human resources. So that is the contradiction. Is it's kind of like, and in the Bible it talks about this sometimes, unto him that hath, more shall be given. There's different, the story of the talents, if you know how to use your resources, you get more resources. So there's a lot of places in there where it's like, you're going to generate more wealth if you have a good engine to generate wealth. And if you give, just like with Walmart, took them, now you can just keep throwing money and they'll be like, cool, now we're going to make more stores. Now we're going to have more products. Now we're going to, and Amazon, the same thing. It's just like the business model's cranking. The more resources you give them, the more they're going to continue to expand and provide value.
Yes.
So that's what I see in our children. That's where I think the biggest focus that us as parents should have is not so much on, I want to give my children money when I die. Well, that's not the engine, right? There's actually a woman I talk about it in the book. Her dad died when he was a wealthy executive. He had an insurance policy, gave her $20 million when she was 18.
Wow.
And everyone would be like, yeah, that's so sweet. I would love that. She's on her 4th or 5th marriage now. She's bought and sold and destroyed companies. She had to go get loans from her mom to maintain her lifestyle. And you look at this going, what a sad state where the dad's hard work and his effort, because, he died, so I can't blame him, but because he never trained her to have a good business model, she didn't know what to do with the resources when she got them. And in fact, that's the tragedy, is that those resources have probably hurt her. All of that dad's hard work and effort has ended up doing more damage to the very child he was trying to help and support and love. Right?
Yeah.
So,
have a good plan.
Well, and that's so that, to me, it's much more important for us as parents to look at what culture are we teaching our children? What are the values? What are our beliefs? When there's a lot of victim mentality out there right now. Oh, you're a victim.
Right.
We could say that, like, you're disabled, so you're a victim. You should just, you have a sad life and everyone's going to disregard you, blah, 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 blah. Here's all the victim. There was a guy I saw speak. He had both of his legs blown off in the war. And now he's like going about it, making a company, making this speaker career. It's like, but you could just sit home and be the victim. He's like, no. And I very much appreciate your values of contribution. You're like, yes, we want to keep people we want a safety net to keep people from just falling when crap hits the fan. But then we want those people to have the values that you have of, I want to contribute though. I want to get off of this. I want to get out of the safety net. I want to be a contributor. And it's that, how are we as parents teaching our kids a good strategy, a good structure, and a good culture, so that the kids, when they're going and looking to get married, they go, oh, I was dating this guy, but I don't think his values are where it needs to be. Versus, I don't know, he's hot and he's got lots of money. We're going to get married. You're like, oh, frick. So that's where I see, if we teach a good business model, if we teach good values and have a solid culture in our family, and help kids understand our structure and our strategy, that is the engine that is going to make them successful in life. And if you throw more resources at them, they'll know how to use it. If you give them relationships, they're going to know how to use them. If you give them money, they're going to know how to use it. But if we just focus on, well, I'm going to make all this money and then give it to my kids, cool, you're going to F them up.
Yep.
Like, why are you trying to damage your kids? But I have seen so many men who are like, That's all I know how to do. I just know, like to your dad, like your dad, I know that I need to provide for the family. So I'm just going to go 100% focus on that. And then, I mean, I had a good friend, they got divorced because he was a hedge fund manager making great money, but they never connected. Then she started to be like, well, I'm lonely and I'm this, and they couldn't figure out the solution. So they got divorced. I mean, there was some cheating involved because they're like, my needs aren't getting met. Your needs aren't getting met. This isn't working. And instead of saying, let's figure out how to work it, they just started to go outside. So I just feel like there's a lot of, do you know if your kids have a good culture set of values, and if they know what strategies and structures to use, then they can make much better choices and they'll get that family flywheel. I mean, you've kind of got it started, I think, as I see it. You're doing good things. You got good values. The kids are productive. Now you can really I think you'll get this started. And then generationally, it sounds like you're doing pretty well. Now you can get this going even faster. So,
what's amazing is my middle grandson, he's autistic, but he's already made up his mind that he's going to have money. So he got this bright idea that he was going to get some a male and a female dog, and he was going to breed them, and he was going to sell the puppies. But my daughter's like, well, how are you going to get the money for that? So he makes these things they call freshies. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
Haven't heard of them.
But I should have one right here. Okay, so if you could see this thing right here, this little plastic type beads or whatever. He's got all these different colors, different shapes and stuff, but he adds this oil that has a fresh smell. So it's kind of like an air freshener.
Oh.
Okay. He even has his own packaging, mind you. And he does all the selling, all the sales, everything himself. But he's got, I know it's going to be hard to see, but he's got these packages, right?
Wow, those look nice.
So his other grandparents have a little table at a flea market where they sell these cups that his other grandma makes. He's got his table set up right next to theirs. First weekend, he made enough money to pay off the loan he got from his parents to buy all the materials, and he's all profit now.
Yep.
And he's only 7 years old. Okay.
Well,
7.
Yeah, and this is a great example of him using his different resources. Right.
Mm-hmm.
He uses his relationship with his parents to get a loan. He uses his relationship with his grandparents to get the space. And I'm sure they're also helping him learn how to sell, how to position what he needed. Right. So you look at, and then he has his parent, he has this overall strategy where he's going with his dog breeding thing. So you have this cool scenario where he's really good at harnessing, not just, oh, here's how much money I have, because he didn't have any, but he's like, but I have resources, I have connections. And that's where he was able to get it all figured out. And that's where, I get very concerned when people talk about, well, I have ADHD, or I have autism, or I have Asperger, but I think Elon Musk has one of those,
He's autistic, I believe.
Yeah, he has, or somewhere on the, then they're just like, he's the most successful person in the world. So let's not pretend that it's a disadvantage. When I was young, people said my mom was like, dude, this guy has way too much energy. Took me to the doctor. Luckily, the doctor's like, I don't believe in medicating people. So I never got it. That ability to focus intently on things I'm interested in has been one of the secrets of my success. So there's this weird place where we're going to the victim side. Well, you're a victim and you have this disease and we need to treat you. And of course, you're not going to be successful because you're disabled like you, or you have ADHD, or you have Asperger's, you have whatever it is, or autism. But the reality is, if we believe in this victim belief, then we're just going to be like, well, now I need someone else to do it for me because I'm a victim. But if you're on the other hand, like, no, I'm an actor in this freaking thing called life. Doesn't matter what I have. The one guy was missing 2 legs, figured it out. You have some disability. I had ADHD. You have all these things. And now it's like, those are superpowers, but we have this thing like, well, we need to medicate everyone. So we're all back to the average. This is not what we want. So I think there's a side of the mental health where we get into this, hey, this is a label you have. This label means you're a victim. Now that you're a victim, now you can wait for a solution that someone else is going to provide for you. Versus, no, this is, you could say, well, your disability now is giving you time to do other things and focus on something else because you can't do the thing you used to do. That's exactly what I think the purpose of a disability program is. We're trying to help people go from one thing to another. We're not trying to be like, if you're an oil worker and then you lose an arm, all right, it's a big disability. You're not going to be able to keep working the oil, but that doesn't mean you couldn't be productive and inspiring or helpful if you're doing some other work. So I love how it's being used, but it's the whole belief that you have. And I don't know where your grandson got his belief, and so, is that from you? Is that from your parents? Is that from your is that from your daughter? Is that from where that's coming from? I don't know, but it's that belief. And that's why we kind of talked about it. He has faith. It's this whole faith without works is dead, right? He has the faith he can do it. And then he goes and works his butt off and makes it happen.
He doesn't, nobody's told him that he can't do it. And he's just determined he's going to do it. He has no doubt that he's going to do it. I mean, he's already branched out to where he buys these pins and puts some kind of decorations on these pins, and people are buying them things up like crazy. These things, they sell like hotcakes, man. And of course, Pawpaw gets suckered every time I go to visit. Pawpaw, I got some new ones. Okay, where's my wallet?
Got to use your social connections.
That's right.
And that's the thing that's what one of the books that we were looking at was entrepreneurship levels and family structures. And if you have a good family structure, it's much easier to become an entrepreneur because you can pull on all these people. If you have a whole bunch of cousins and grandparents, and if they're successful, then you have this whole network to grab. But if you're like, well, I came from a single household and then they came from a single, and I don't even have, just think about the kids. If you grow up in a single household, legitimately half of your resources are gone. You don't have, if the dad's not there, well, the dad's not there. Are you connected to the grandparents? Probably not. Are you connected to the cousins? Probably not. So there's this massive hole of social resources because of that structure. And it's not a blame it on the kids. It's just if we're really trying to look at our families, I think a lot of men have looked at it being and I'll be honest, there were some really hard times in my own life. I made some poor financial decisions, and I was like, man, it'd be better if I wasn't with my family, right? It'd be better for them if they didn't have me dragging them down.
I know the feeling.
Right? I think a lot of guys go through this, especially with my wife. I'm like, she's beautiful, she's amazing, and I feel like I'm an anchor on this family. I'm not doing my provide and protect role that I felt that I needed to do. But I didn't take into account, if I had left, all the damage that would have been done to my children that I wasn't considering. Right? And it's not that you want to keep people in miserable relationships, but there's also a side of, what are you trying to get? I think so many husbands and wives, they don't even communicate well, what do you want and what do I want? And how can we negotiate so that we're both getting our needs met? Because I found with my wife, I have to shovel snow. I'm in Utah. We're getting a lot of snow this year. I'm constantly out there. It's cold. I have to do it in the morning. I have to do it before we can do this Irish dance in the afternoon. But there's a side where I do it, and then my wife's like, man, thank you so much. I so appreciate you. And I'm like, that's all I needed. I'll go do this. Sure, there were some points when I may have been a little angry at different things or pissed, but it all made it worth it. Right? It's I feel fulfilled. She appreciates me for that act. Right? And that's where I just feel like we need to get more of that appreciation for the differences, allowing for the differences, and really, when I was in the company, I love the sales guys because they're doing stuff that I don't necessarily want to do. And I love the developers because they're doing stuff that I don't necessarily want to do. And, I appreciate it as a whole. And I think for some, we've just become so focused in on one little thing of money that we've lost sight of, we're trying to make a unit here together. And let's focus on the unit being successful. Let's not focus on what I want or what you want necessarily. What's best for the unit itself, because that's what we both want.
That's right.
And to me, when you bring that together, it's just beautiful. People are so much more motivated. Like I say, I really think if you get that good vision, you have the right culture, the good structure, it's much harder to fail in a marriage when you start with that. Whereas if you're starting from, we have different values, it's like, okay, this is probably just a ticking time bomb.
Mhm. Yeah, that is something that's very important, to make sure that your values line up, because if they don't, it's not going to work. It's just
But
not.
but here's the interesting thing. If you ask most people what their values are,
Hmm.
they don't really know them. If I were to say, like, what are your core values and beliefs? Most people would kind of hum and ha. I've done it in interviews. One guy said, I was at this company and we didn't have the same values. And then I said, so what are your values? And he was like, I don't know. Right. That's where I think most people, we haven't taken the time. That's part of the stuff. I have some resources for the book. It's like, what are your values? Do you value do you value contribution like you do? Or do you value family time? Or do you value, independence and freedom? What are your values? And trying to actually become self-aware of what it is that your values are. Because once you know that, then it's easier to go find someone who understands those values and probably is aligned. But if you don't know those values, you're more than likely going to have some conflicts.
Yeah.
And that's where, I used to do interviews at the company I was with, and I did the culture assessment, and it was basically, here's our values, here's the 5 values, and then I'd ask questions around those. Right. So that to me is, I think a lot of people, when they're dating now, they don't know their values. They don't know what roles they really want to do in a family. And then you go, so what's going on then? What are you even doing? You're trying to hire someone without actually thinking through what culture they need to come to and what kind of job they would be doing in the family. So I think it's a very, I've talked to a lot of people about the book, and they're like, you should build a dating app. I'm like, oh, geez, that is not a fun industry. But I do feel like we're just not able to help people, like in a business. Oh, you do marketing, you do this, and people know kind of what they do. But in the family, I've seen so many people, I've had a number of conversations with women where they've actually said, well, I want to be an executive and I want to be this top tier person. And then I'm like, who you want to marry? I want to marry a guy who's an executive and a top tier person. I'm like, who's going to stay home? Who's going to, if the kid gets sick, do you want to have kids? And then they're like, well, I don't know. Well, my husband would stay home. And I'm like, I don't know very many top tier guys who are super driven who want to stay home.
That's
So
right.
are you looking for this unicorn that doesn't exist? And then they're like, well, wait, I hadn't thought about that. And then, it's like, they're not really thinking about the logistics of what they're saying on what they're trying to make work. And then you're like, well, I haven't found anyone. The dating market's so bad. Is it that the dating market's so bad? Is it you're just bad at dating? It's kind of like, we can't hire any good people in this company. Is it that you can't hire them, or is it that you're not good at hiring?
Well, I
So,
think that is kind of sad if people can't figure out what their values are. And I have a feeling we line up on quite a bit, and the things that we believe in we would be called extremists now. Okay. When back then, when our grandparents' day, it would just been normal. I'm all about family. I'm all about, being a hard worker.
mhm.
But the thing is I'm also about balance, because there is a time for work and then there's a time for family. When it's time for family, I don't pay attention to this thing anymore. We sit down at the table to eat together, the phone gets put away.
Mhm.
We're talking, we're spending time together. I don't think enough people do that. Can you imagine that's considered extreme now?
Well, yeah, it's interesting when you say the values. I think one of the pieces that has happened with the values is most people used to live in a particular place, go to a church together, and that's usually where you would find it. So in some ways, there was already, because of the religious commonality, the values were very similar. Right now, what we're seeing is people are moving all over, changing where they live. A lot of people aren't religious. So you're kind of like, well, where is the value system coming from?
Right.
And it's not. And then where am I meeting people? I'm meeting people on an app that has, 100,000 people from Austin, Texas. Boom, boom. Like, what is their values? What is their culture? What, you're not filtering for any of that. And there's like this infinite amount. And so I think that's a lot of the problem. Is now they're like, you are the extremist from 2 cents. How we met and how we believe in those type of things, and like you're saying with family and the value set, that's extreme because so few people, or very few people, are doing it, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Right.
And first and foremost, God has to come first.
Well, yeah, and that's really where when you hear people talk, I always like to practicalize stuff. I agree, God needs to come first, and that's really your set of what is right and wrong. What is the values of that? How do I need to live? That's really when I see God needs to come first. It's, are you living your values? Because if you're not living your values, then even if I purport to live this value system, but then I disregard it all the time, that's not going to be useful.
That's true. That's true.
So that's where I really feel like a lot of what people are missing is just, do they understand? I mean, the purpose of my book is trying to say, do you understand how a family really works and how resources really flow? This is a cyclical nature. You take actions. If you take good actions, you have your wife, or you make meals. I've made meals before. Now my kids are healthy. Now that we're healthy, they're going to learn better at school. Now they learn better at school. Now they're going to be able to make better friends. And you see this, like, there's a compounding interest effect here. You have good friends, they're going to pull you in with more good friends. You have money, you can make more money from your money. And now you have compounded interest coming from your money. Now you have compounding interest coming from your friends. If you develop good skills, then quite often people are like, hey, we want to hire you. Oh, now I need to develop more skills, and now I'm more interested. So there's this flywheel effect, if done right, where you actually are generating much more for your family as well as for society. And the metaphor I really have looked at, which is, it's like every family, I think, is a pillar of our society. And it's like the Colosseum, where you can knock out some of the pillars of the Colosseum and it'll stay standing. But if you knock out too many, the whole thing collapses.
That's true.
So that's where I look at it like, I don't think, and the purpose of me writing the book was just like, here's how families work. Like, just like business, here's how business works. I'm not trying to say, here's how you have to do anything. I'm not being prescriptive, but I'm just saying, here's some of the values, how they play out. Here's some of the, careers that play out. Here's some of the values, beliefs, structures that just work and don't work. It's much more trying to be like, I'm trying to make kind of like the physics book of families. Like, here's just the basic principles, use them to do whatever you want. And maybe that's just the engineer in me. Like, I can take physics principles, then the engineer, I can make a rocket ship, that's awesome. And that's what I'm hoping that people do with this information on families, is they can do the same thing. I can build this family that's created this flywheel of massive success and massive contribution in society.
I believe that my marriage is a success because the things the areas I lack in, my wife is usually pretty good at, and vice versa. I mean, when it comes to computer stuff, I mean, that's what she does for a living. She always working on a computer. Now I happen to cook better, but don't say anything to her. But it's really like doing fixing stuff. I'm better at fixing stuff around the house. I'm always like plumbing and woodwork. That's just stuff I grew up around, and that was part of my job. I was in the water department, so I know plumbing. But say I don't know, my shirt's ripped at the seams or something. Well, my wife knows how to sew. She knows all that stuff. Yep. She actually probably knows cars better than I do. Okay. So that's just, she was always around it. You know, my dad didn't teach me how to work on cars. I had to pick up from friends the stuff that I know, but she happened to grow up around it. So, you know, maybe not traditional, but there's things she's good at, I'm not so good at, and vice versa. It works.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the thing of like, when you look at colors, there's things called complementary colors,
Yes.
right? Where if you like, oh, I have blue and then I want a different shade of blue, much less interesting than blue and then I want an orange, right? These things, they pop, they very much complement and make the whole thing more rich and vibrant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think in relationships, we want to be focusing on just as same as in a business. I want to focus on the synergy. I want to focus on, I bring this together and this together, and together they make, instead of 1 + 1, it's 1 + 1, 1 + 1 = 2, it's 1 + 1 = 5. There's something else here where I bring these two people together and then I get this great thing at the end that I didn't expect. Right. So that's where I think that we with our spouses and even with our kids, the more complementary stuff you have, the more you appreciate each other, the more you can do, the more flexibility, the more access, everything is just greater in that scenario. So,
I mean, let's face it, men traditionally are better at reasoning. They're at thinking things out, where women, they have the emotional side of it down a lot better. And you need both.
well, yeah, women usually have a good intuition about relationships and really about the social connections in the family. Hey, is our relationship, something's off? The kids are feeling a little off. Really, women really have great intuition. And so, yeah, you want both, right? I've learned over the years, and there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman, I think, but it talks about, we want to think things through, but then you also want to think to yourself, okay, I thought it through. This is the decision I think to be right. But then you need to just kind of like relax your brain and go like, but how does it feel?
Yeah.
Does it feel right? Because if you don't go through the dual process, often you can get down the wrong path intellectually. Or if you're just like, hey, this feels good, I'm going to do it. And then you're like, oh, you just lost a bunch of money. Yeah, maybe you should do both. And so I agree, you want both of those in the marriage and in a family, because there's a balance there.
Well, too many guys that I know that go by feelings, they make the wrong decisions. Oh, well, I feel like cheating on my wife, and now look what happened. It feels good to sit here and drink a beer all day long. Well, okay, that doesn't work out too well either.
Feels good now. Doesn't
It
feel
feels
good
good
later.
now, but later.
Yeah.
Do you have a website?
Yeah, I have a website. It's called thefamilyflywheel.com. Talks about the book there. I have some forms on the book resources where you can download it and it'll help you kind of think through different resources, because I think a lot of people don't understand all the resources they have access to, but also helps you go through your business model. And then what I recommend is that if a husband and wife want to do that, they both fill out those two things separately and then compare, because often you can see things like, well, are we compatible, or where's the conflict coming from? Because most of the conflict in a marriage is not, it just tends to be on the value stuff. It's not this like, well, we can't do it. It's like, oh, we're having conflict over what should be done based on how we're valuing things. So I have some resources there. I have a blog up there as well. So yeah, that's the main place you can find me. Of course, you can find the book on Amazon. I mean, if you've seen the book, it's kind of got the circular nature there with those things circling, because it is a cycle. I mean, that's how good families, you create a flywheel, starts going super fast, and then you have more wealth than you know what to do with.
Now, social media, which I'll be honest, I kind of stepped away from it for about the last month and a half. I don't know. I just needed to get away from it. I kind of started coming back and putting my posts up, but social media is kind of important, especially with what we do. And so do you have some social media sites?
Yeah, well, you can find me on Facebook, Aaron K. Shelley, or on LinkedIn, Aaron K. Shelley as well. Look it up there. So It's those are really the best ways to connect me. Also, if you want to just email me, Aaron at thefamilyflywheel.com, you can get a hold of me that way too. I mean, I'd love to talk to people if they have questions or issues or whatever. I just want to help people. And so whatever mode helps them the most, I'm happy to do it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I love LinkedIn. It's a lot more serious, and you don't usually get the other BS that you get on the other social media sites. Man, it has been wonderful talking to you.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun conversation. So yeah, let me know if there's anything I can do for you, because I think we're all involved in a good cause of helping people be more successful.
I appreciate what you do and for spending your time with me today. And also want to thank all you folks out there. If you are new to the channel, I hope you'll come back. Please hit that subscribe button. From my regulars, hey, thank you all for putting me here and allowing me to do this. And until the next one, everyone, please take care. Be kind to one another. God bless and peace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Listen to the Vibes. You can catch us on Buzzsprout or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook at The Vibes Broadcast Network